At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's General G. Let's begin. It was Lohara's first week on the planet Griok, and her vacation routine had already taken shape. She would wake up early and wait for her fiancé Chiron to help her into her wheelchair. They would spend their days together, with her pretending not to notice she was a burden and him pretending their marriage wasn't based on mutual interest. At night, she would watch from the sidelines as Chiron took time for himself, dancing with any alien woman he could find while getting drunk on Griok's traditional ale. On this particular evening, Lohara found herself lost in thought as she watched Chiron dance with what appeared to be a human woman, if she had recognized the species correctly. All she could see was skin that wasn't green like hers and Chiron's, but a body dangerously similar to their own, with hair, eyes, nose, and ears familiar enough to make Lohara worry about how much Chiron seemed to be enjoying himself with this woman. "That green guy is your partner, I'm guessing." The voice from beside her broke through her pitiful thoughts. Lohara turned to find a human man leaning against the wall, and her mind immediately connected the dots. Without acknowledging his question, she shot back, "Is the human woman yours?" The man had sandy brown hair that fell slightly over his forehead, wearing clothes that seemed practical rather than fashionable. Dark pants and a simple shirt with sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked with small scars. He laughed, but it was a sound edged with self-pity. "Looks like we're both in the same boat," he said, gesturing toward the dance floor, "watching from the back while our partners have their fun." Lohara caught the self-deprecating humor in his tone and found herself matching it. "Well, we could at least share a drink," she said. "That is, if humans can drink alcohol." The human laughed, a genuine sound this time. "You're quite straightforward, aren't you?" He pushed himself off the wall. "I'll get us a few drinks from the bar." She accepted, and just minutes later found herself at a small table with this stranger, 2 glasses of colorful beverages sitting between them. The conversation took an awkward turn when she asked him why he wasn't dancing with his mate. He chuckled and shrugged. "Born without rhythm, I'm afraid. Trust me, I really tried to learn it to please Emily." Then he turned the question back to her. "What about you? Why aren't you out there?" Lohara just stared at him. "Are you blind? Did you not see the wheelchair?" The human's face flushed, and he immediately began apologizing. "I'm so sorry. I blame the alcohol. I forgot that not all species have limb regrowth or advanced prosthetics. My species is basically a baby in space exploration," Lohara explained. "Chiron and I are only traveling because my father is a powerful merchant. Our family is one of the few with access to starships." The human apologized again, then asked, "How long will you be staying on this planet?" Lohara considered whether she should answer such a personal question from a stranger, but something about their shared situation made her decide on honesty. 10 more days." The rest of the night unfolded in a way Lohara hadn't expected. She and the human, who introduced himself as Jeff, exchanged stories about their homeworlds, their work, and gradually more personal details. "I'm an environmental engineer back on Earth," Jeff said, swirling his drink. "Spent most of my career trying to fix problems other people created. What about you?" "I'm a botanist," Lohara replied. "I've been doing my best to help my family find markets for our native plants in the wider galaxy, though the whole operation is tentative at best for now." For the first time in days, Lohara found herself genuinely enjoying a conversation. She forgot to glance over at Chiron, forgot to monitor his movements on the dance floor. The alcohol loosened both of their tongues, and their conversation drifted into dangerously personal territory. "Emily and I are probably too different," Jeff admitted, staring into his glass. "I'd rather spend quiet nights at home, maybe reading or working on projects, but she wants to go out and have fun every single day. Sometimes I wonder if we're just fooling ourselves." Lohara felt a pang of recognition. "I know I'm a burden to him. Someone who can't even be his dancing partner," she said quietly. I know this marriage is arranged for political reasons, but part of me still feels like we could be happy if I could just keep up with him. Do humans have arranged marriages? We used to, centuries ago, Jeff said. Some cultures still do, but most of us get to choose. He paused. Doesn't make it any easier, though. Among their self-deprecating jokes and silly comments about the aliens around them, and even their own partners, that evening ended up being the best vacation night Lohara had experienced so far. She found herself laughing genuinely for the first time in weeks, sharing stories about the absurd diplomatic meetings her father dragged her to, while Jeff regaled her with tales of his projects on Earth. Her frustrations melted away entirely as they bonded over their shared experience of feeling like outsiders in their own relationships. The spell shattered when both Chiram and Emily returned to their table. Chiram's usually composed demeanor cracked as he took in the scene. Lohara and Jeff leaning close together, slightly tipsy and deep in animated conversation, empty glasses scattered around their table. "Making new friends, I see," Chiram said, his gaze fixed on Jeff, his cold tone carrying a sharp edge that made Lohara's stomach clench. His green skin seemed to darken in obvious irritation. "Just passing the time," Jeff replied, straightening in his chair, his voice equally cool and neutral. Throughout their brief, stilted interaction, Lohara couldn't help but notice how Emily stared at her. The human woman's expression was the opposite of a smile, cold, calculating, and hostile. Her eyes swept over Lohara's wheelchair with what looked like disdain before settling on her face with undistinguished dislike. The journey back to the hotel stretched endlessly. Chiram pushed her wheelchair in complete silence, his movements sharp and jerky, radiating a dark mood that filled the space between them like a toxic cloud. Every attempt Lohara made at conversation was met with terse, single-word responses until she gave up entirely. The silence infected the next morning as well. For the first time since arriving on Griak, Lohara woke up later than usual, her head pounding with a dull ache, to find the room completely empty. No Chiram waiting to help her transfer to her wheelchair, no morning routine, no pretense of companionship. She struggled to maneuver herself from the bed, her arms shaking with the effort, and had to rely entirely on her own strength to navigate the day. When hunger finally drove her to call the hotel staff for meals, she realized how truly alone she was. When Chiram returned later that day, he acted as if nothing had happened. He helped her into a wheelchair with the same mechanical expression as always, made polite conversation about their dinner plans, and suggested they visit the markets tomorrow. The pretense felt more hollow than ever. That night, they were back at the cantina, the sprawling establishment that served as Griak's primary hub for interspecies social gatherings. Chiram's routine remained unchanged. Some nights he danced with whatever aliens were in the mood for fun, their various forms moving to the pulsating music under the colored lights. Other nights he partnered with Emily, who appeared sporadically throughout the week with her calculated smile and sharp eyes. Jeff never showed up again. Lohara's evenings became a careful juggling act between three consuming thoughts. She kept one eye on Chiram, tracking his movements across the dance floor with the same dutiful attention she'd maintained for weeks. She pretended Emily's piercing gazes didn't bother her, though she felt each cold stare like a knife against her chest whenever the human woman appeared. But deeper than both of these concerns was a question that gnawed at her with increasing persistence. Why had Jeff never returned? Had she enjoyed their conversation more than he had? Had Chiram's hostility frightened him away, or had he simply given up following Emily around and decided to focus on his readings and projects, just like he said he preferred? Each night, she found herself scanning the cantina's entrance, telling herself she was just alien watching, while secretly hoping to catch a sight of sandy brown hair and practical clothes. The disappointment that settled in her stomach when he didn't appear became as routine as Chiram's dancing. Lohara sat alone in her hotel room on their final day on Griak, surrounded by half-packed luggage scattered across the bed. Part of her felt relieved to return to her normal routine back home, to the familiar rhythms of her botanical research and her family's cautious ventures into galactic trade. But another part of her, a part she barely wanted to acknowledge, felt like she was missing something by never having seen Jeff again. She wanted to thank him for that conversation at the very least, to say goodbye properly. She folded another set of clothes into her travel case, listening to the muffled sounds of Chiram's voice drifting from the hotel lobby below as he finalized details with their ship's captain. The mechanical nature of packing suited her mood. Simple, methodical tasks that didn't require her to think about anything beyond the immediate moment. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Lohara wheeled herself over hesitantly, wondering if it was hotel staff or perhaps Chiram returning early. When she opened the door, her breath caught. Jeff stood in the hallway, looking slightly nervous and carrying a large rectangular box under one arm. "Jeff!" The surprise in her voice was unmistakable. What are you doing here?" He shifted the box awkwardly. I was hoping I could talk to you for a minute." Before she could think better of it, she found herself backing up and gesturing him inside. "Of course, come in." Jeff stepped into the room, his eyes taking in the scattered luggage. "Last day, right?" "Yes." She studied his face, then glanced at the box. "What's that?" His awkwardness was more than obvious as he set the box down carefully on the small table by the window. "Well, after our conversation the other night, I realized I didn't need to spend every evening following Emily around the cantina. So I decided to stay in my room and work on a little side project, something completely unrelated to the construction my team is doing here." Lohara's curiosity sharpened. "A side project? Would you—" He ran a hand through his sandy hair. "Would you like to see it?" She nodded, unable to suppress her interest. Jeff opened the box carefully, and Lohara's world tilted. Inside, nestled in protective foam, were a pair of mechanical legs. They were sleek and elegant, designed with joints that mimicked natural movement, crafted from materials that reflected light, a kind of black metal she was not familiar with. "You built—" Her voice failed her entirely. "I remember you saying your species doesn't have this kind of technology yet," Jeff explained, his words coming faster now, as if he needed to get them all out before he lost his nerve. "I used some of the 3D printing equipment from our company. I had to guess at your measurements based on what I could observe, and I found your room number by asking the hotel staff about an off-world green woman in a wheelchair." He paused, meeting her eyes. "I remembered you said today was your last day, so I stayed up all night to finish them." Lohara stared at the legs, then at Jeff, then back at the legs. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. They looked like they belonged to her species, as if someone had studied their anatomy and replicated it perfectly in mechanical form. "I could install them," Jeff offered quietly, "if you want." "Now?" The word came out in a low, surprised voice. "It's easier than you might think. The interface connects directly to your nerve pathways through your lower torso. The whole process takes maybe an hour, and then there's a brief calibration period while your brain learns to communicate with them." Lohara felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. No one had ever offered her something like this. No one had ever seen her limitation and thought to solve it rather than simply work around it. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, please." Jeff's face lit up with genuine happiness as he began unpacking additional components from the box. Interface cables, calibration tools, and what looked like a small computer tablet. He worked with the focus of someone who truly understood his craft, explaining each step as he went. The installation was surprisingly painless, involving precise connections that Jeff made with steady hands and careful attention to her comfort. Less than an hour later, Lohara stood, looking at herself in the mirror, Jeff beside her. The legs felt strange but natural, responding to her thoughts as if they had always been part of her. She took a tentative step, then another, marveling at the sensation of height, of movement, of independence. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, turning to face him properly, at eye level for the first time. "I don't know if I ever could repay something like this." Jeff shook his head firmly. I should be thanking you. That conversation the other night, it helped me realize some things about myself, about what I want." He gestured toward the legs. "This was just me doing what I love to do, solving problems." As Jeff began gathering his tools, he paused. "I should get back to work. My team will be wondering where I disappeared to." "Wait," Lahara said suddenly. Could I take a picture with you? In front of the mirror. I just want something to remember you by." They stood together in front of the mirror, and Lahara captured the moment, herself standing on new legs, Jeff with his slightly rumpled shirt and satisfied expression, both of them reflected in the glass like two people who had found something unexpected in each other. After Jeff left, taking his tools and his warm smile with him, Lahara remained standing in front of the mirror, testing her balance, taking careful steps around the room. She knew she would have to explain this to Kairam soon. But since she wouldn't be a burden to him anymore, she thought he would perhaps be happy for her. She had no idea how wrong she was. When Kairam returned to collect her and their luggage, he found Lahara beaming at herself in the mirror, standing tall on unfamiliar legs. He froze in the doorway, saying nothing, his green features shifting through a spectrum of emotions she couldn't quite read. "Kairam, look at my new—" she began, turning toward him with excitement still lighting on her face. "It was that human from the other day, wasn't it?" He cut her off, his voice flat and cold. "Yes, but it's a gift. He just—" "Have you been seeing each other in secret?" The accusation hit her like a physical blow. Lahara stared at him in shock. The thought hadn't even crossed her mind. "What?" Instead of answering, Kairam rushed toward her, his movement sharp and aggressive. He grabbed her datapad from the bedside table and began scrolling through it with violent urgency. When he found the picture, her and Jeff standing together in front of the mirror, his face contorted with rage. Without warning, he hurled the device to the ground, where it shattered against the hotel room floor. "It's just a picture," Lahara cried out, her voice breaking. "We haven't seen each other since that night. Nothing happened, I swear to you, nothing—" But Kairam was already storming out, slamming the door behind him with such force that the walls seemed to shake. They missed their scheduled departure that day. Lahara spent hours crying alone in her room, standing on her new legs that now felt more like a curse than a gift, with no idea where Kairam had gone or when he might return. That night, he came back. Their eyes met across the room and Kairam simply said, "I forgive you. I still want us to be together." Lahara surprised herself by feeling not exactly happy at his words, but she approached him anyway, kissing him and wrapping her arms around his familiar green form. "What do we do now that it's too late to leave?" she asked softly. "Let's dance," he said, his voice gentler now, "and leave in the morning. Finally go back to our world." It happened just like that. Hours later, they were on the cantina's dance floor, swaying together to the rhythmic beating of alien music. Lahara found herself surprised at her own reaction. After years of living without her legs, she felt nothing at all while dancing. Only a certain numbness as they held each other, moving to the beat of this foreign song. The legs worked perfectly, responding to every thought, every intended movement, but the joy she'd imagined feeling was nowhere to be found. Her eyes kept drifting to the entrance despite herself. Her mind struggled between two conflicting desires, wanting to see Jeff once more, to thank him properly, to share this moment of her actually dancing, and simultaneously wishing desperately that he wouldn't come tonight, wouldn't see her here with Kairam on the dance floor, wouldn't witness her choosing duty over the brief connection they'd shared. The night ended without either Emily or Jeff appearing. When morning came, Lahara found herself leaving Griak, standing on her new legs, as their ship lifted off. Kairam held her hand as they watched through the viewport, the world where they'd spent their vacation growing smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely below them. Their normal routine awaited them back home, their normal life in the place she'd always called home, where family obligations and the weight of expectations would resume their familiar patterns. But as the stars shifted around them during their journey back, Lohara couldn't shake the feeling that she was leaving something precious behind. She was leaving behind a version of herself that had laughed freely, spoken honestly, and for one brief moment had been seen as more than just a burden or a political arrangement. The day after their return from Griak, the surprise on her family's faces when Lohara walked off their ship was worth capturing in a photograph. Her younger sister, Vesa, actually stumbled backward, mouth agape, while her middle sister Kira let out a shriek of delight that echoed across the landing platform. Her mother covered her mouth with both hands, tears already forming in her amber eyes, and her father, normally unflappable in his most complex business dealings, stood speechless for a full minute before rushing forward to embrace her. The entire compound cheered as word spread that the merchant's disabled daughter had returned home walking on mechanical legs. The celebration quickly soured when the questions began. Kairam immediately took control of the narrative, his hand possessively on Lohara's shoulder as she fielded inquiries from curious relatives and family friends. "A generous gift from an alien trader," he explained smoothly, over and over again. "Lohara was so charming during our vacation that they insisted on helping her." Later, when they were alone, Kairam's tone turned stern. "Tell them it was a gift from an alien trader," he insisted, "but don't specify it was a male, and definitely don't mention it was human. You understand why this is important to me, don't you?" Of course, she told the truth to her mother, her sisters, and her closest friends. She couldn't help herself. The story of Jeff's unexpected kindness felt too important to reduce to Kairam's sanitized version. But to her dismay, they all seemed to take Kairam's side when she confided in them. "It's better this way, dear," her mother said gently, stroking Lohara's hair as they sat in the garden. "Why hurt his ego with unnecessary details that might be misunderstood?" Her sister Vesa nodded in agreement. "Kairam is protecting your reputation. People talk too much. You should be grateful he's being so understanding." Even her closest friend Nira, who had always encouraged Lohara's independence, seemed to think the lie was justified. "The truth doesn't matter as much as perception," she said pragmatically. "Your marriage is too important to risk over the details of how you got the legs." After that, her life resumed its planned trajectory. Wedding preparations began immediately. Political alliances were confirmed through carefully worded announcements, and Lohara found herself swept along in a current of expectations and traditions that felt more suffocating than ever. The legs that were supposed to represent freedom now felt like evidence of a secret she was forced to keep, a reminder of a connection she wasn't even allowed to acknowledge. 6 months later, on the morning of her wedding day, Lohara found herself alone with Kairam in her family's spacious kitchen, the familiar space filled with the scent of brewing tea and fresh bread. Her mother and sisters were scheduled to arrive within the hour to take her for the traditional scented bath and marriage preparations. She sat absent-mindedly stirring her morning tea, her thoughts scattered and unfocused, while Kairam seemed unusually cheerful. "Remember Emily and that planet Griak?" he said, laughing as he spread sweet preserve on his bread. "Gods, that feels like a lifetime ago now." Lohara murmured something noncommittal, still lost in her own thoughts. "Things weren't always great between us during that trip," Kairam continued in a casual, almost nostalgic tone. "But we stayed strong together, even after the mutual infidelity. Shows how solid our foundation really is, doesn't it?" Lohara's eyes snapped wide open. Her spoon clattered against the ceramic cup, sending droplets of tea across the wooden table. "Mutual infidelity?" Kairam's cheerful expression faltered, and he suddenly became very interested in his breakfast. "It's nothing worth discussing now. Today's about our future." "No." Her voice gained strength and clarity for the first time in months. "Now that you've mentioned it, you have to tell me everything. We can't get married with secrets between us." "Lohara, please, let's not spoil today with—" "Tell me!" The firmness in her voice surprised them both. Kairam sighed heavily, setting down his bread with obvious reluctance. "Fine. I know you had a little romantic escapade with that human as revenge for my own involvement with his woman, but it's all water under the bridge now. We both made mistakes, we both forgave each other, and now we can move forward." Lohara felt the world spinning around her. She was shocked both that Chiron was absolutely certain she had done something wrong, and by his casual confession that he indeed betrayed their engagement. "You actually," she whispered, then her voice grew stronger, "you actually had an affair with Emily?" "It was vacation," Chiron said defensively, his green skin darkening slightly. "These things happen when people are away from home. But I forgave you with your thing with the human engineer, so we're even." "My thing?" Lohara's voice rose dangerously. "There was no thing. He gave me legs because he felt sorry for me sitting alone every night." "Oh, come on, Lohara. The picture, the way you two were talking, how defensive you got." "One conversation," she screamed, standing so abruptly that her chair toppled backward with a crash. "One conversation where he listened to me while you left me alone all night to do God knows what with that human woman." She could feel herself cycling through emotions too quickly to process them properly. First came denial. Surely Chiron was mistaken. Surely he hadn't actually betrayed her trust. Then anger blazed through her as this casual admission sank in. She found herself bargaining internally, trying to rationalize his behavior, trying to convince herself that maybe vacation affairs were normal, maybe she was overreacting. "This can't be happening," she muttered, pacing back and forth on legs that suddenly felt foreign again. "This isn't how this was supposed to go." "Lohara, calm down. We can work through this." "Work through what?" She whirled on him. "Work through your assumption that I'm a liar? Work through the fact that you've been cheating on me while I sat alone every night watching you dance with other women?" "It wasn't cheating. It was what, Chiron? What exactly was it?" The silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of Lohara's ragged breathing and the distant noise of morning activity from the compound. "This marriage," she said finally, her voice breaking with the weight of realization, "is not a good idea." Before Chiron could respond, before he could offer more explanations or justifications or attempts to minimize what he had done, Lohara ran. She burst through the kitchen door and into the main courtyard of their family compound, her powerful mechanical legs carrying her faster than she'd ever moved in her life. The morning air whipped against her face as she sprinted across the familiar stone pathways of her childhood home. She could see her mother and sisters approaching the main gate in the distance, their arms full of ceremonial oils and wedding preparations, their voices bright with excitement about the day ahead. Her mother wore the traditional painted robes reserved for the mother of the bride, while her sisters carried the ornate silver bowls used for the purification bath. But Lohara ignored their calls and surprised shouts, using Jeff's gift to sprint past them with a speed that left them standing frozen in shock. "Lohara, come back this instant!" Her mother's voice echoed across the courtyard, sharp with authority and growing panic. "We have no time to prepare you for the marriage if you don't return now." "There will be no marriage," Lohara shouted back without slowing, her voice traveling across the morning air with a finality that made her mother gasp. She ran until her lungs burned and the mechanical legs grew warm from the exertion, a strange and wonderful sensation that reminded her she could feel her feet touching the ground with each powerful stride. She ran through the twisting streets of her family's district, past the markets where she'd spent her childhood, past the botanical gardens where she'd first fallen in love with plant life, until she reached her father's sprawling spaceport on the outskirts of the city. Ships of various sizes sat gleaming in the morning sun, cargo vessels, passenger transports, and sleek diplomatic ships that carried her father's business across the galaxy. She found the captain of a small but reliable-looking cargo vessel, a grizzled Qatari alien with deep blue skin and knowing eyes, who immediately recognized her despite her disheveled appearance. "Miss Lohara, the big boss's daughter, what brings you here so early?" His voice carried genuine concern as he took in her tear-streaked face and the way she was breathing hard from her desperate run. Still catching her breath, tears streaming down her green cheeks, she looked up at him with desperate determination burning in her eyes. "Take me back to planet Griak." The day after her desperate flight from home, Lohara arrived back on Greok and checked into the same hotel. For some inexplicable reason, she even requested the same room she'd shared with Chiron, though this time her legs ensured she didn't need any help settling in. She walked through the familiar space on her own, unpacking her hastily gathered belongings with steady steps. She turned off her datapad immediately upon entering the room, ignoring the dozens of messages from home that had accumulated during her journey. She was glad she'd instructed the ship's captain to ignore all communications and simply report her whereabouts to her father. Of all people, she had no doubt he would be the one to take her side without needing an explanation. Hours passed with her alone in that room, and only now did her mind catch up with her heart, flooding her with questions she'd avoided during her desperate escape. What was she even doing here? Jeff would certainly have finished his construction project by now. He was likely to be somewhere else in the galaxy, perhaps back on Earth with Emily. It was entirely possible she would never see him again. After all, she didn't even have their picture anymore. Chiron had destroyed her datapad. All she had to go on was his species, a few pleasant memories, and a first name. She didn't even know what construction project he'd be working on, much less whether he would want to see her again. She spent that first night alone with her thoughts, her mind traveling everywhere except the present moment, back to her childhood, forward to an uncertain future, sideways into possibilities she barely dared consider. The following days became a lesson in frustration at herself and her own foolish heart. It took her 2 whole nights of sitting alone close to the dance floor in the same spot where she'd met Jeff to realize that she was being purely emotional, that there was no realistic chance she would encounter him again, and that she was simply wasting time while avoiding the inevitable confrontation awaiting her at home. Nights 3 through 7 became exercises in healing, not of the body, but of the mind. She didn't choose to dance with random aliens, but she would be lying if she denied telling her entire life story to the poor bartenders, returning to her room each night after drinking more than a healthy amount of Greok's potent ale. The last 2 nights were filled with acceptance. She realized she couldn't stay here forever and recognized how selfish a daughter she was being by keeping her parents in the dark while spending their money to chase something she couldn't even bring herself to call love. Just a one-sided feeling she would never be able to confirm was mutual. On her 10th lonely night of chasing ghosts, she was prepared to return home the next morning, but not without one last dance, even if it meant dancing alone on the floor while surrounded by aliens who likely thought she wasn't right in the head. She swayed to the alien music, her mechanical legs moving with the rhythm, when a voice came from behind her. "Careful with those metal legs. You might smash someone's toes." Lohara turned around and tears were flowing before a single word could escape her lips. Jeff stood there, looking exactly as she remembered. Sandy hair, practical clothes, that gentle smile. She tried to stop the tears, desperately aware that every alien in the cantina was probably staring at the green woman crying on the dance floor. She didn't care what they thought, but him, that was different. She fumbled for words, trying to ask why he was here, but what came out was, "Where's Emily?" Jeff smiled and asked back, "Where's Chiron?" Lohara found herself telling him the unfiltered truth. "I don't know. I ran away from my own wedding thanks to the legs you gave me." Jeff laughed, his eyes widening. "You mean that literally?" She told him everything. The lies Chiron had pressured her to tell, the months of pretending, the casual confession of mutual infidelity that had shattered her world that morning. "I came back to this planet hoping to—" She stopped herself from finishing, not wanting to sound desperate. Jeff laughed, then glanced around at the crowd of aliens who had stopped their own activities to watch the emotional human and the crying green woman. "Everyone's staring at us," he said. "Want to dance? Might deflect some attention." She accepted, remembering his earlier confession. "I thought you said you were a terrible dancer." Jeff wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and whispered in her ear, "Does it matter?" For the first time since receiving the legs, Lohara felt the true joy of dancing. Moving with Jeff felt natural, right, like something she'd been waiting her whole life to experience. "Holding you feels so right," she whispered back. Minutes passed in comfortable silence, their bodies moving together to the alien rhythm before she finally asked, "Why are you here?" "I made friends with one of the bartenders," Jeff said, his breath warm against her ear. "He contacted me, saying a certain someone was drinking too much while telling the world how much she missed what she never had." Lahara felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Finally, she gathered the courage to ask, "Does Emily know you're here?" Internally, she was ready to tell him everything she'd learned about Emily's calculating nature, to use every piece of information as ammunition if needed. To her surprise, it wasn't necessary. "Let's just say I found out she belongs to the streets," Jeff said simply. "We broke up." Lahara felt a mixture of shock and guilty happiness wash over her. "And where," she asked softly, "do I belong?" Jeff said nothing. Instead, he took one of her hands and placed it over the left side of his chest, where she could feel his heart beating steady and strong beneath her palm.